to approve any minutes. Is that true?
That's correct.
So I'd like to call the meeting to order this morning. Thank you all for attending. The primary agenda for today is to review a resolution regarding, or actually requesting review and modify current cell tower regulations. I'll briefly just go through this unless you guys would like me to read the whole resolution. But basically, we're asking that the change in the policy to be not readily discernible in terms of tower policy, vertical co-location of carriers, to encourage that vertical co-location, to include general permits for cellular antennas on existing tall structures, to allow a height 20 feet above existing structures within hamlets, to offer a bonus of 10 to 20 feet above tree canopy for new towers currently serving unserved areas, and asking the cell tower applicants for information regarding, including maps showing how higher tower height would expand coverage and benefit residents and travelers. So before we get the discussion started, I'd like to see if we can have a motion to bring this to the floor. Dennis, thank you. Second by Rachel, thank you. And Brad, good morning. I see you also. To get started, I'd like to allow a couple of guests to make some comments. So Willie Janeway is with us today. Peter Bauer, I believe, might be with us via cell. And Fred Monroe, we've chatted with Fred this morning. So if you guys don't mind, I'd like to get some comments from some of the people that have been involved in our community, involved with this issue for some time. So Willie, if you don't mind, could you give us a brief statement?
Yes, Mike, and brief in political circles can be long or short. So I'm assuming, first of all, good morning to everybody. Hope you're healthy and safe, but I'm assuming you're looking for maybe just 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
Okay. Didn't want to go shorter or longer than your target was. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to all of you supervisors, county legislators, for your public service, and thank you for flagging this issue. I wanted to note a few things and then make a suggestion for your consideration, but obviously the decision on how you proceed is yours. The observation is that with the governor and others in local government working together, looking back over the last several decades, we've made some substantial progress in communications connectivity across the county, across the Adirondacks. And I think it's important to recognize that and applaud our leaders for helping to make the investment that's made that possible. Secondarily, I would say it's also important to recognize that we aren't where we need to be and where we should be in today's world. There are places in the Adirondacks, some spots that have actually moved backwards while other spots have moved forward. And while we obviously don't need, at least from my perspective as executive director of the Adirondack Council, full cell coverage in every remote corner of the woods throughout the park. There's some wilderness areas where people are attracted to our great landscape because they get to disconnect and get away. But we do have spots and communities along corridors that don't have the level of connectivity we need. And so my observation is that we've made progress and need to do more. My suggestion would be that rather than proceeding with what I understand, I'm looking for a modification or a weakening of the Adirondack Park Agency's current guidelines. I would respectfully suggest those guidelines have worked very well, and our biggest obstacles have been the economics and the companies without enough customers and enough money. It's been hard for them to prioritize the investment in the technology that we need in our region. And I would encourage the board here to thank the governor and the leaders for what they have done, for their pledges to extend out to more of our communities and more of our travel corridors, and to focus not on this policy change, which I honestly don't believe is going to lead to the kind of improvements we need, but to focus on thanking them for what has been done and urging there to be further investment. As cell company phones have said in public settings, the challenge in the Adirondack North Country is the number of people we're serving. It has not been the Adirondack Park Agency's policy. And we need to have subsidies and state funds to support to make sure that year-round and seasonal residents, travelers, businesses have the connectivity that they need. That's going to require dollars. If we're going to allow, and I want to give credit to Bill Farber for, I'm about to steal a phrase that he's used, if we're going to allow the companies to have permission to use state resources, Verizon, AT&T, Westchester, New York City, to access the market of millions, why aren't we requiring, as part of that permission that we as a state are giving to them, that they also invest in the last mile and in places in the Adirondacks? So I would not be supportive of the motion you're looking at, but I'd be very supportive of your urging the state to pat themselves in the back for what they have done, recognize what still needs to be done, and up the funding. And I would point out there is federal funding available for this. So especially in this current state crunch where we can't run a deficit, but the feds clearly can, there is opportunity and there's funding available there to help with this. So I can make myself available for questions. I did provide a written letter to your office, Mike, that I'm going to assume is circulate. So I'm not going to go through and read that to you. Don't mean to be disrespectful and do that. You obviously can all read it. So I will stop there, and hopefully I've been succinct enough. Again, thank you for your service and your attention to this issue.
Thank you, Willie. I appreciate it. Let me move forward to Peter. I don't know if Peter made it on the line this morning. He did not. He was calling in from Blue Mountain Lake, and he was complaining about
Doesn't have any cell service.
broadband coverage. We did talk via cell this
Not a
morning.
range.
Let's move forward. Fred Monroe.
Yes.
Do you have any comments?
Yes. Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about?
Thank you, Mike. And
Sure.
good morning to everybody on the committee. It's nice to see everyone with this whole new world of trying to do this by Zoom. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss this towers policy with you this morning. I think Jerry Delaney, when he was on for the last meeting, talked about the review board and the history, how it got started, and how we, who we represent. So I won't burden you with that. But for my own background, I thought it might be helpful to just tell you, that I do have some knowledge of this subject. My background was in physics. I was an Air Force electronics officer for 5.5 years before I moved back to the Adirondacks. And in the review board, I was the counsel from 94 to 99. And in that capacity, attended virtually all the APA meetings and most of the committee meetings. And then from 2005 to 2018, I was the executive director and again attended all the meetings. So I've seen many cell tower applications, and I've heard the discussion, and I've heard the discussion of the commissioner, seen the presentation of the staff. So it's a subject that has been near and dear to the hearts of review board members for many years. And what we believe is that the cell carriers would like to build higher towers. Higher towers mean more customers mean more revenue. So they like to build higher towers. And you can see that that's what they do outside the Adirondacks. They build on high places, or they build on tall structures. So I don't think it's a case that they're not willing to build. And yes, it's true that the revenue is an obstacle, that they're not going to make as much money in the Adirondacks as they make in New York City or they make in Albany. But also, if they build higher, again, they have more customers, more revenue. So I think if the carriers were honest about it, and I have talked to some of them, they would say, we propose towers in the Adirondacks from experience of our company and other companies that the APA wants lower towers. They want it down, at the tree level or below the tree level. And so that's what we'll propose, because we're beating our head against the wall if we just keep trying to come in with higher towers. And as local government representatives, I believe that our primary responsibility is the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. And it becomes more and more apparent every year that means having reliable cell communication. we shouldn't be treated like a third world country because we're in the Adirondacks, and I think the majority of residents and visitors wouldn't be offended by somewhat higher towers. We know that the cell and emergency radio are line of sight technology. And when you have line of sight technology, you got to worry about obstructions. So that's the reason that they place their towers outside the Adirondacks above obstructions. The substantial invisibility standard has been around for, I think, about 17 or 18 years. And I think it pretty clearly does reduce the height, and it reduces the range of the cell communications. One thing to note, I think, is that it is a policy only. It's not a law that was passed by the legislature. Our representatives in the legislature didn't get to vote on it. It's not even a regulation that has to go through the state administrative procedures law. It's just a policy that the commissioners at the agency adopted. And it's a policy that they can easily modify. And I think there's many of them that could be convinced that there should be a modification of the policy. There's been a number of commissioners that have proposed this not readily discernible standard. That's part of it's an element of the substantial invisibility standard. So it's not something that's going to be new. Also, a provision, I know you had this in front of you, but a provision about building in the hamlets has also been discussed many times at the agency, and been supported even by representatives who are more known for their environmental policy than friendliness to the economy. That why are we worried about whip antennas on top of the Crown Plaza Hotel when there's so many other visual obstructions and intrusions in Lake Placid, and there's other examples too. So, and then why not allow a somewhat easier standard, a general permit, for example, for towers, whip antennas on water towers, inside church steeples? That's been proposed. At one time, we had discussions with a company that just went around the U.S. Proposing that kind of cell tower. And so I think that there's merit in thinking about these ideas and giving the carrier some incentive for vertical co-location. The APA policy and the substantial invisibility standard, the towers policy, specifically talks about wanting to consolidate in visual intrusions. And so they say that they support co-location, but if the towers aren't not high enough to allow multiple carriers on the tower, multiple antennas, then what you're going to get is horizontal co-location, which means multiple towers in the same site or close to the same site. And that increases the cost for the companies, decreases the chance that they're going to build the tower, and adds to the visual intrusion if you're going to build multiple towers on the same site. So we think there's many changes that the APA could make that would encourage this. It's something they could easily do. It's within their power as commissioners. And we think it's a good idea to pursue this. And so thank you for your opportunity to discuss this morning, and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Fred. Rachel, I know your hand is up, but I think Peter Bauer has joined.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, my hand is not up. I thought I lowered that quite a while ago. I was just going to make a motion.
Thank you, Rachel. Peter, are you online? I see you might be muted.
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. And Willie had a chance to speak, and Fred Monroe had a chance to speak. So I thought I'd give you a couple of minutes to just kind of talk about this issue to help educate us.
Well, bravo. Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting this morning. I apologize, I can't see all of you, but my wife is a kindergarten teacher, and she spends the morning on Zoom calls with her students. And in Blue Mountain Lake, that pretty much eats up all the bandwidth. So you get my audio and not my picture. So one is, we were involved in the policy with the agency many years ago for developing the policy for substantial invisibility. And when you look at the agency's record of approving telecommunications projects since then, it's voluminous. You look at the number, every month it seems there are tower projects that come up to the agency. They are largely non-controversial. They largely get put through. And when you look at the number, and that's just the number of new towers, when you look at the number of co-location permits that the agency is putting out, there are many more co-location permits than there are actual permits for towers. So there's a significant amount of towers. When you look at the agency map, they are, they're largely on the road corridors and they're in community areas. And that's just the agency towers. So I live in Hamilton County, in Blue Mountain Lake now. For many years, I did live in Lake George. When I lived in Lake George, for a period, I was the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, thanks to Dennis, who's up on the screen. And I was chair of the ZBA. We handled a number of tower projects at the ZBA, and the planning board handled even more than we did at the ZBA. So there are a number of projects and it would be interesting to see how many projects have gone through local government that didn't need APA review in Warren County, because that would be an important data point. Then there's the question of the inventory of need. What studies are we looking at? What are the examples that are not just anecdotes, but actually data driven for where are the gaps, where are the shortcomings, where are the areas that in fact coverage is not provided, where coverage could be provided through a proposal such as Fred has articulated. We think the existing policy, just demonstrated by the sheer volume of scores and scores and scores of new towers, and the hundreds of co-location permits that have been approved by the agency over the last 17, 18 years, and the number that have been approved by local governments across the park, shows that we have a program that is working. We'd be interested to know where the gaps are, what the studies that have been done that show us how the agency policy is blocking actual telecommunications projects in the park, where there is a desire by the companies to put them up, where there is a need by the community to get them. We'd be very interested in seeing that. Good data should drive public policy. And we'd be very interested in seeing, a public policy change such as being recommended, being supported by a data-driven process, so that, it's not just being done by anecdote, it should be done by good science and good data. So I guess that's where I would leave it, Mr. Wild, but I thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you, Peter. I'm still trying to figure out my mute button after all these months. But any questions from the committee to our guests this morning? Wow, they must have done a really good job. Chester. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Craig. I see Chester over your head, and I want to call you Chester. Mr. Leggett.
As Bruce used to call Uncle Chester, but yeah. Chairman Wild, thank you for having Fred and Willie and Peter chime in on this so that we have a broader sense of what's going on here. My question would be, what would be detrimental if this resolution passed and was adopted by the agency?
Anyone? Willie? I think I pick on you first. Maybe I'll work my sequencing out a little bit better later. Any thoughts on the negative consequences?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Craig. One of the things that's happened in the Adirondacks, and Fred Monroe deserves a lot of credit for this, is the Common Ground Alliance, people coming together and realizing that all too often, and this happens nationally, people fall into an A or B and nothing in the middle. and effort to find common ground. Invasive species would be a great example where there's an environmental benefit and an economic benefit, and they're so linked together. So Supervisor Leggett, to answer your question, the concern that some of us would have is that the visual attraction, the wild character, the Adirondacks, is perhaps our biggest economic pull in terms of bringing money and people. And if we start compromising that more than we already have, that's going to have negative environmental and economic impacts. I believe we have a good, balanced compromise policy now in place, and we need funding to subsidize companies, not a weakening of that policy. I don't think it would be good for attracting money and travelers to the Adirondacks to have it be known that communities in the Adirondacks want to weaken the environmental protections that we have. I'll try to be succinct. Thank you for the chance to answer the question, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Fred?
I think,
Sure, go
I
ahead.
mean, one of the concerns I have heard, from many visitors is that they're just, very concerned if they are not able to get a cell signal, they're not able to communicate, especially the younger people. They don't want to be in a place where their cell phone doesn't work. So that's a real negative. I remember one time, I think it was about 10 or 15 years ago, I was at a meeting up at Paul Smith College and talking to the admissions counselor. And the admissions counselor was relating a story that she had a discussion with parents and a student. And the parents were encouraging this student to attend that college. And that student was saying, there's no way I am going to go to a college where my cell phone doesn't work. And so, I think that's the attitude of a lot of people, and it's the attitude of many visitors. And I think many visitors would want the assurance that they have the safety when they are hiking in the woods, that they can have their cell phone in their pocket, it can be turned off. But if they have an emergency, they can immediately communicate with first responders. Those first responders can give them guidance as to what they should be doing in that situation. They can triangulate on that cell phone and find their way to that person. And that can result in much better outcomes than would otherwise happen. And it would also reduce the possibility of death, which we have had several of those. So I think it is important.
Thank you, Fred. Peter, any comment? Claudia, I see you. Just hold on just a moment.
Sure. Thank you. I guess two comments. One, I was on the Essex Chain Lakes yesterday, and you stare at the Blue Mountain Tower up and down that lake system. I talked to a reporter from Third Lake, and I can't tell you how many, Lake Lila has cell service. Little Tupper Lake has cell service. I'm pretty stunned at all the places I get to in the park that have cell service. Every mountaintop, you pick up a cell signal these days. So, things are pretty good. I would be interested, Fred, if you have something beyond anecdotes. It's all well and good about the prospective student at Paul Smith's. It's all well and good about, what you're relaying about cell service providers who build taller towers outside the park. But let's see the data. I think what would be really helpful to this effort is to bring data to the APA that shows that really quantifies and characterizes the challenges and the problems. I think, I'm always skeptical of policy by anecdote. That doesn't really work for a lot of issues, because we don't know when it's policy by anecdote. We don't know if the diagnosis of the problem is truly accurate. We don't know if the proposed solution meets the real problem. So if there's real data, and if Warren County can help to get us real data about what the weaknesses and deficiencies are, so that I don't think any of us are interested in maintaining the Adirondacks as a place that is impaired economically or puts public safety at risk, if that's the case. Some of you may believe that's the case. I don't believe that's the case. But having good data, I think, would be enormously helpful. Thank you.
You mentioned that you were in the Essex chain yesterday. I was also, and I was at the Polaris Club, and there's no self signal there. So maybe it's over in the lakes themselves, but it's not on the other side of the river. And you know, I mean, I agree with you. It would be best to have data, but we in the review board have attempted to get maps from the carriers, and they're quite jealous of what their service range is, and so it's hard to get those maps. That would be ideal, but it's not really difficult to get hard data as to where you have service and where you don't. All you need is that all the phones from the carriers that provide service, and you drive around and see where you get the signal and where you don't. And many of us that travel around the Adirondacks, we know where you don't get service when you're on the roads, and those who hike know where you don't get service when you're in the woods. So yes, that could be documented. Yeah, it would be helpful. But I think the anecdotes are enough to know that we got a problem.
Supervisor Bramer.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you so much, Chairman Wild. Thanks to our guests. I really appreciate hearing your perspectives. One of my concerns is about, Mr. Monroe said that the substantially invisible policy has been in place for 17 or 18 years, and we have heard that there have been numerous cell towers approved. I guess I have two questions. What was the process for developing this particular change in the not readily discernible? I did try to do some Google research on it, and I saw that it was proposed about 10 years ago at least. And I know that since then, the FCC has maybe not approved is the right word, but sort of given the blessing to APA's current policy. So is this, I feel like this is taking us backwards, and I don't feel like the Adirondack Park necessarily needs higher towers. We have very mountainous terrain. Why aren't we looking forward at new technology like 5G and encouraging that in APA's policy going forward as a way to provide more cell phone coverage to our hamlets and our villages and places where people live, not necessarily covering every inch of our wilderness with the cell phone coverage? So if you could give me some more background data on where this policy change is coming from and how that actually leads us forward.
Well, I mean, it would be wonderful if we have new technology, that where we don't need the towers to be higher in some cases, but unfortunately that's not where we are now. And I think it's unquestionable that the APA substantial invisibility standard requires that the towers be at or below the tree line, which is an obstruction. If you're below the tree line, then the signal doesn't propagate and you have short range. It also requires, in most cases, that it be below the surrounding topography. Ideally, you want to be above the surrounding topography. I know that'll never happen in the Adirondacks. And, it would be great if you could put them on mountaintops. There are a couple examples.
Well, Fred,
There's some on. Okay, well, go ahead.
I just want to interject. If you're saying it won't happen, why can't we come up with a policy that will be workable and provide a solution for cell phone coverage?
That's what we're proposing. This is just to get the discussion started. Willie mentioned, that we've had common ground. This is something that can be further discussed at common ground. It's not something that's going to change overnight. But I think this COVID-19 situation has vividly illustrated to us all that cell coverage in the Adirondacks needs to improve. Peter says, well, this is just anecdotal. Well, anecdotal, you can drive around and you see there's lots of places where cell phones don't work. And the policy should be amended. It's a policy. It's not a regulation or a statute. It specifically says in the policy that it's not to be rigidly applied. It's a policy only. It can be easily changed by the agency. What's wrong with discussing moving forward with trying to improve cell coverage?
Well, then why do we need to change this if the policy is flexible in and of itself? And what exact does not readily discernible mean to you that they could put towers on the top of the mountains?
I don't think it does mean we're not proposing putting towers on top of a mountain. You know, we're proposing that if you've got a water tower and you want to put 4 whip antennas on it, you got this big giant obstruction of the water tower, and we want to put
Yeah.
some little whip antennas on it. What's wrong with that? What if we put them
Nothing.
as the church people, you know? So some of these ideas may fly with the agency and with environmental groups, and some won't. But you have to get started someplace to discuss these things. I'm happy to discuss them with Willie and Peter and anyone else that wants to discuss them.
Supervisor Wild.
I'm sorry, Supervisor Bramer. One real quick one. I need to get to Supervisor Garrity.
Okay.
Would you like to go, Claudia?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I like the idea of continuing to debate this. I just don't know if this committee is willing to do that. Maybe you could take a straw poll.
Let's move over to Supervisor Garrity first.
Yeah, my first thing is, I will ask Peter, with all the hundreds of towers they've approved or whatever amount of towers, I'm wondering how effective they are, because there's still gaps in cell coverage in the APA. That's number one. We do have a map of the gaps, and we have drawn the maps, redrawn the maps several times. And for me, it's key that we get the gaps covered. And to Willie thanking the state, well, in 2016, when we were at the local government day, the state stood up, and like they have for every year, and says, you're all going to have cell coverage. That's since 2016. So yeah, I thank the state for what we got, but we're not there yet. And now we're in 2020. We had kids that had to be taken places to learn like other kids, long distance learning. I think it's time to stop talking about it and do something about it. Now, I watched a roundtable on Channel 10 just last week, and even Congressman Tomko said broadband and cell coverage is not adequate in this area. So, with all these towers they're putting up, how effective have they been? Obviously not too effective in our area, and I'm just talking about Warren County. I'm not talking about the Essex chain of lakes. I'm talking about Warren County. I'm talking about gaps in the town of Warrensburg, gaps in the town of Thurman, and gaps in Stony Creek.
Thank you, Kevin. Supervisor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things were said that, the goal is to cover every inch of the Arrowhead Park. That is not true. That is absolutely not what's going on here. What's going on here is I've got residents in the town of Warwick, and I've got teachers, and I've got doctors that have reached out to me. They're unable to even secure hard lines effectively in large sections in my community. I have teachers that come to my town hall to use my Wi-Fi because their current infrastructure is inadequate. There's a public safety issue. I've heard from dispatchers that their job has been complicated by many dropped calls. This is a huge public safety issue, and it's really important to our communities. We're not talking about covering the wilderness. We're talking about our communities, the people that we represent, that we have an obligation to provide, to support infrastructure that supports their sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Supervisor Sieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say, I think perhaps Chairman Wild, you're getting less questions this time because of the type of work that has already been put into it for several years, not just by this board, but by boards prior. And I think prior supervisor Fred Monroe really speaks to the issue given his legislative background, but the issue that you have to start somewhere. We're the first county that goes into the park. It's something that definitely was advocated for, not just this time at the National Advocacy Conference or Association of Counties, but prior to this last time where Supervisor Beatty and I both went and spoke about the issue. But we have a president of the AATV here on our board. We continue to listen to our college president, who just spoke to us last week about the problems with connectivity. And that digital divide. And I think that while all due respect to the gentleman who talked about policy by anecdote, but in fact, that is how policy will get started. Those personal real life experiences are ones that as leaders and legislators in our districts, we need to be paying attention to and listening to, and then moving it forward to find that solution. So frankly, I think this discussion has been long overdue. I think the recommendations are something that becomes a starting point. And, you know, if it's not going to be us, and perhaps I'm stealing a quote from Supervisor Conover, who's maybe on the line somewhere, but, you know, if not now, then when? And I think it's important that we continue to put this in the forefront of our discussions, but encourage every other county around us to be talking about it as well. So I would say those anecdotes are incredibly important as we start to look at experiences that involve online learning, which is it's just not going to go away. So I appreciate the opportunity and the information that's being sent out. And I haven't had much of a chance to look at the letters today, but I'm sure they'll continue to come in prior to our full board meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Supervisor Merlino, Jean, you have a
Thank you,
comment?
Chairman. I get frustrated sitting here listening to this. You all know how I am. And Ms. Bramer, I would say to you, you live in Glens Falls. Why don't you spend a couple of days with me in Lake Luzerne and see what it's like to call Supervisor Garrity, for instance, and we start talking and I take 2 steps in a different direction and I lose him. I have a cell tower in Lake Luzerne, one of the first in the area. Took 3 years to get it. And we were told then we needed 30 feet more because it just barely meets the top of the trees. And not even a quarter of my town can get cell service. That's true. I could be in my town hall, which is 500 feet from that tower, and not get service sometimes, depending on the weather. So the idea, the higher it's not important to you, but it's important to us. We don't need more towers. We just got to get them up a little higher. Now, for about a year, Verizon's been trying to add a dish to that tower of ours, and they've been working with the APA to raise it 30 feet to make sure that it gets the majority of the people that they want to service. It's just not happening. So it's not more towers. It's just the idea to get more couple a little higher to get more distance over the hills and the mountains. So I challenge you to come and spend a couple of days with me in Lake Luzerne and see what it's like to be talking to somebody and take 2 steps away and lose them. So this is, you know, this anecdotal and all this information, it's there. We've been talking about it for years. People can't get service. Can't get web connections. When are we going to learn? I love the environment, but the people that come up here to go to the Adirondack Mountains come from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, which they got towers all over the place, and it doesn't bother them to see them because they know they get the service. That's my comment.
Thank you, Gene. Supervisor Hogan, did you have a comment?
I do. Sorry for joining you all late. I'm concerned that we are mixing up broadband and cellular here. I hear a lot of talk about how in this pandemic we are struggling, and nobody's been more vocal about it than me, that our students do not have the connectivity, our teachers don't have it, but that's broadband, that's not cellular. So please, when we're discussing this, can we try to separate that out? Because I can say from my perspective here, I have very few residents who are going to use cellular service to connect for learning. I kind of want to remove that piece. I actually would like to go so far as to ask that we remove any reference to the pandemic from this resolution if we are to move it forward. You can't simultaneously argue to me that this is something that we have done our due diligence on over the last 2 decades and also have to move it right now because it's relevant to the pandemic. I don't think you can mesh those 2 arguments. So I would really like to caution everybody to separate the learning from the cellular stuff. You know, I mean, I agree completely that cellular service needs improvement. And I agree that there are some handicaps we're feeling because people aren't getting that. I hear it all the time. People come up here to visit, they come up here to ski, they don't have cell service. But the broadband is something else entirely. And I just want to say one more time, I'm just disappointed that we are moving forward on this discussion at this time. We all have a lot of really, really urgent things on our plates. This is a divisive topic that could have waited. I have found reference to this topic going back to 2007 in minutes from the Board of Supervisors. I don't know why we have to be pursuing a divisive topic right now. We should be looking at things that bring us together, things that are actionable, and things that will make a difference to our constituency right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Supervisor Simpson has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify that cellular can be used in the place of where you can't lay fiber. I've had a wireless company look at a project in the town of Horicon, and it can be served by cellular. iPads actually function off of a cellular component. They have a cell phone number. Those tablets, you can Zoom meetings, you can do long distance learning, and you can also do telemed. I've spoken to doctors and they've told me what they need. And they need this infrastructure.
Mike, can I?
Supervisor Hogan, yes.
Thank you. I hear you, Matt, and I know that. My husband does telemed from our house right here. I'm well aware of all the complexities of that. But for the people in the town of Johnsburg that I represent, there are very few that are going to use cellular for distance learning. They just can't afford those kinds of plans. So I would like to see us focusing on broadband and advocacy to improve that, because if for some reason we have to shut down again, that's what we're going to need here. Really, truly, we need better broadband. We should be pushing for these companies to finish this build out. That's where our energy should be going right now.
Supervisor Leggett.
Thanks, Chairman Wild. Yesterday, I sent you agency policy number 4 regarding telecommunications. Probably should have telecommunications towers in the Adirondack Park. Perhaps that should have been sent out to the whole committee as well, so that we know what we are looking to amend here. I also have before us here agency number 1, the policy and guidance system on how the APA board is able to adopt their policies on things. I got these from talking with a former chairman of the APA board, Ross Whaley, who I serve with on the Common Ground Alliance with Matt Simpson and Willie Janeway as well. And asked him if his experience as chairman of the board there and on cell towers. And he described a situation where you do have some flexibility, and because these are policies, these are guidelines adopted by the board. They're not necessarily rules and regulations. I also spoke with Rob Lohr, Deputy Director of, regulation, yesterday to see what stands in the way of cell companies to, as they're applying, and what are some of the things that they have to go through. I also put a request out to a woman that works for a company that does have a cell phone application up in Essex County in Lewis for an 85-foot tower that's open for public comment right now at the APA. And at last week's Adirondack Action broadband call with Dave Wolf, I asked him what the relationship between cell phones and broadband is. So if I can just take another minute here, Chairman, just to pull all these items together.
Please do.
Yes, thank you. Dave Wolf said that better cell phone coverage in the Adirondacks would certainly help broadband, as people could use their smartphones to access internet via cell signal. If they didn't have a broadband connection but did have adequate cell signal. However, it's not ideal, as the cell phone data plans can get expensive with intense online activity. And that's what Andrea had pointed out. Most of our constituents may not have that economic bandwidth, so to speak. New cell towers might offer the chance to also use the tower for fixed wireless antenna to bring broadband into the surrounding area. And the feasibility of using the tower would depend on the height of the tower versus the surrounding topography, et cetera, and the number of potential subscribers in the area. So to put this discussion into context, we deal with a sparse population. So is it economically feasible for more cell phone coverage? If we open the way, will it get built out? And as we all suffer here after 3 phases of New York State broadband program, and we do not have broadband brought into our communities, and billions of dollars have been spent on trying to get this state covered 100%. And these private companies have had public assistance on doing this. They still have not yet delivered. So I'm skeptical of the reasoning for loosening this, that all of a sudden we will have better cell phone coverage. More advocacy has to happen with the providers to get out there and actually do something, and actually provide these towers with this service to our constituents. The APA board, I guess if we look at again, this resolution coming before us will then be adopted or picked up by other counties as well, advocating for these changes to policy that the APA board can adopt by themselves. They do not need any other legislation, any other guidance by the executive branch, etc. If I read that right, and correct me if I'm wrong. So we'll start here with Warren County adopting this. Then it will go through, Inter-County is going to pick up on it as well. And I imagine it'll be sent out to other county boards to also adopt in this fashion or similar to it, and then send it on. So that's why I take it it's before us at this point in time, and not some other county. With the agency's policies and guidance, they do go through a lot of review, and they are bound to stick with a lot that is in the state land master plan and the land use plans for park wide. So some of it is going to have to trust the APA board members to, as they get this request, to update their policy. And if it does get updated, I bet it would be with a little bit of change. If it were, it would be with some change, that they would still implement it with the best interest of the Adirondack Park Act in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. By my clock, we have 24 minutes, so I will take a few more comments, and please be brief. Supervisor Bramer.
Thanks, Chairman Wild. I'll be pretty brief. I just wanted to remind everyone that Supervisor Hogan did send out a lengthy email with many questions that I have not heard the answers to. My questions have not been answered, and I would like to know if the committee is willing to work on the language of this resolution to make it a unified message coming out of Warren County, or if this is something we're just going to pass through today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Would you like to make a motion?
I would also like to say that, you know, another avenue that we could be pursuing is the county investing in infrastructure. I haven't heard anything about that. I haven't heard us talking about it. And frankly, we probably don't have the money to do it, but if we want more cell phone towers, we could be doing that too.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee or other supervisors that are on the line? Supervisor McGowan.
Thank you. Good morning.
You, Bradley.
That's
Short,
a great
don't
idea.
mind, please. Keep it-
I just have a quick question. You know, a lot of the problem is getting the state to approve our cell towers. So, I mean, even if we had the money, Supervisor Brazier, that you know, it's getting the approval to put them in there. I did take a trip through the Adirondacks Sunday on the bike, really all the way from here, all the way up through Saranac, Lake Placid, Tupper Lake, Saranac Lake, and back down. And you know, I don't. This is the way of the future, and why we can't do broadband and cellular, you know, for both parties, because there's a surcharges that comes out in all our cable bills and our phone bills, and where does all this money go that we're getting all these surcharges for? And I thought long ago it was for the infrastructure, and especially in places where they don't make the money. And really, unfortunately, it gets down to the almighty dollar. Well, we're not making any money, but for the safety of everything, I think we really needed to pursue this. And you know, and what's wrong with a little tower every now and then up on the? Once they're up in there, you won't see them. You know, after a while, they just become, you know, and it helps everybody. So I really think we need to pursue this.
Thank you, Brad. Any other questions, comments? Peter Bauer, I just saw something pop up.
Thank you. I was just going to say, looking at the agency's list of projects approved last year, there were 3 in Warren County in 2019, 1 new tower in Stony Creek, 2 co-location projects, Hague and Lake Luzerne. That's only 2019. The agency has an inventory, because this has been a controversial project, the agency has an inventory on their website of all the projects they've been involved in over the years. You know, speaking for Protect the Adirondacks, we'd be very interested in working with whatever forum the county chooses to move ahead on identifying where the gaps and shortcomings are. You know, we'd be interested in something more than, you know, can you hear me now kind of study. We actually did that when the whole issue around the tree at Pilot Knob. We did a study where we went every 1/10 of a mile on the roads in question during the APA adjudicatory hearing with the cell technology as it existed with the different programs. And at the adjudicatory hearing, we were told that type of study was not acceptable. So be that as it may, but you know, if we can get the data, if we can put together a program, I agree with Supervisor Hogan. Broadband is really the key factor for Adirondack communities and economic development. And you know, I've been following these issues for years, intervened where necessary, advocated over the years for greater broadband coverage in the park. There are still communities where the broadband cable runs right through the community and no one is able to hook up yet. And that's frustrating. In Blue Mountain, we saw the cable hung on the poles for, you know, almost 2 years before anybody could hook up. So that's a reality for these issues. But we're happy to work, energetic to work with the county on moving these issues ahead. But let's try and do it with good data and good science. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Chairman Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. Since Stony Creek was mentioned, I'll just clear the air on that tower. That's a public safety tower. That's so our sheriff's department and our fire department can actually receive communications. It's 60 feet tall. It's got nothing to do with cell phones. It's not stable enough to carry cell phone tower antennas. And if the county would like to fund that, that's what we're waiting for. So, you know, get right on it. I guess my only comment on the whole discussion is I don't understand the fear of asking the APA to adjust its policies. It seems like there's an awful lot of fear here about discussion. And I guess I don't understand that.
Thank you, Chairman Thomas. Supervisor Hogan, 60 seconds. I need to move on.
I have no fear of discussion. I would just like to do it at a time when I don't have the world blowing up around me. That's all.
Thank you. Fred Monroe, 60 seconds at most. Fred, you're on mute. Sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. In my experience, the APA does not necessarily always do what local government asks. So, I mean, you could just ask in a general sense, please take a look at that policy. Here's a few suggestions. And I think that's what really the resolution is. It doesn't bind them to anything in particular, but it asks them to take a close look at it and consider modifying the policy. There's probably many other good ideas out there on how to do it.
Thank you. I just had one question for the committee. Craig, give me just a moment. But as I'm thinking about this resolution and I'm thinking it may pass based on the comments that I'm hearing, do we need to put a thank you and recognize progress in this resolution? Any thoughts from the board, committee? Supervisor Leggett?
Thank you. Well, that ties into one request I had. If we could strike the last whereas in the proposed resolution of whereas APA's current tower policy is negatively affecting public safety, education, and economy. I don't think that needs to be in there to promote this idea. It could be then replaced with thanks for all you've done.
Would you like to make that motion, Craig? I think it was Rachel and you that had this.
No, I didn't bring it to the floor. Somebody else brought it to the floor.
Rachel.
I brought it to the floor, Mike.
I'm sorry?
I said I brought it to the floor.
Dennis?
Yes.
Are you agreeable with that? Rachel, I think you were second on that. Am I true?
I was a second on it. I don't want to jump ahead of Supervisor Dickinson and Craig, with all due respect, if you want to add a thank you at the end, but I'm not comfortable with removing that last whereas. I think it's an important point, and we've taken some time to look at the resolution and the 6 points in front of us, and I think the county attorney's office did an excellent job in drafting that resolution. So we have a motion and a second on the floor, and when discussion is done, I'm happy to vote on it. I don't know how Supervisor Dickinson feels, so I'm just a second.
I'm with you, Rachel.
So, Andrea, I think you'll be the last, because I do need to move on to another resolution and an opportunity that's in front of the committee. So, Andrea, go ahead.
I would like to request removal of all language that references COVID-19 and the pandemic.
What does the committee feel about that? Can I show of hands that would agree with Supervisor Hogan? I see one. What about, I see two that agree. Those that want to leave the COVID reference in, show of hands. I don't see any. Wait, two.
What's your proposal, Michael?
The Supervisor Hogan mentioned she'd like to have any reference to COVID-19 stricken from the resolution.
No. As is.
I'm a no as well.
I think that's 3 is no. So I'm going to call a question. Are those in favor of moving this resolution to the full board? Can you please say aye or raise your hand? And Amanda, some help on this?
Aye.
I see 1, 2, 3, 4,
Mr. Diamond and Mr. McDevitt are both voting in favor.
5, 6, and against? Show of hands. Against. I see against. I see 3 on the screen. So,
Sorry, can you just clarify who was against that? I didn't catch it here.
yeah, Supervisor Bramer, Hogan, and Supervisor McGowan, you're against this also?
No.
Are you against this or for this, Brad?
4.
4. Thank you. We have 2. 2 that are against. Supervisor Hogan, Supervisor Bramer. And that resolution passes. We'll send it on to the board. Thank you, everyone. And we have a few more minutes. Wayne has an opportunity for us. I think there's an extension to the grant. Wayne, would you like to inform the committee briefly?
Sure. Sorry about the last minute on this, but we had approval from the state on Friday to modify a work program. Currently, Sarah has been working with Advocate and Creative Sidekick on promotional campaigns for the county. relative to the First Wilderness. And, you see the poster behind Craig and some of the others, and those are the products along with social media. So the contract with Advocate expires the end of June. As I said, we received authorization on Friday from the state to continue that. We'll use $10,000 of grant funds, no cost to the county. We'd like to extend that contract for a year for the $10,000. There's a proposal that talks about the deliverables. Sarah will work with Advocate on that to, make the most opportune times and products. I kind of ran it through committee today, asked for the consideration, because if we waited to next committee meeting, their contract would have lapsed the end of June, and it might have created some issues, and we'd just like continuity of service. So I believe Amanda sent out the information, the resolution request form, the proposal, and then some metrics from Advocate as to followers and likes. One of the things the metrics don't talk about, and I think needs to bear out, is the number of shares that our posts get, especially from other organizations. So it goes onto their page, and then we lose track of it from there. So I think the social media campaign has been cost effective, and I'd ask the committee's consideration to continue it for another year based on no cost to the county.
Thank you, Wayne. We have a first and second to bring it to the floor. Dennis, first.
So there's no match on that, Wayne?
The match has already been provided.
Okay.
So
We have a
I'll
second.
move that.
Floor. Thank you,
I'll
Dennis.
move it.
Second, Supervisor Leggett, any questions, comments from the committee? Any questions, comments from other supervisors of the public? I will call a vote. I'm sorry?
Supervisor Wild, we do have public comments.
I'm Don, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We do have some public comments when we get to that portion. Are you ready for that now?
Let's, do you suggest we do it before we vote?
Oh, you asked for public comments. I don't know if that's what you're ready for.
Is it public comments related to the grant, the last resolution?
No, the last issue, the cell phone issue.
All right, sorry, I'm going to push that off then. So I'm going to call this to a vote. All in favor of this resolution to renew the contract for the First Wilderness? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The resolution passed. So I will open it up to the floor. Any other comments? Don, it's all yours.
Gina Mitzer from Lake George Chamber asked, relative to the cell phone issue, is there anything in particular the business community can do with regard to advocacy efforts?
That's a good question. Maybe we can take that up with the task force. Don, any other comments?
Yes, there was one through Facebook. I'm trying to find it right now.
Chairman, I have a question then before we adjourn, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The comment via Facebook was Verizon does not work well in North Creek, and AT&T works better.
Thank you, Don. Any other comments? So Supervisor Bramer, I think we're right on schedule here to finish before the 10 o'clock meeting. So go ahead.
Thanks so much. Yes, I saw that Ryan sent out an email, our county administrator sent out an email saying we were 7 for 7 the last few days. Just want to see if we and businesses should be planning for starting phase 2 next Wednesday. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I think it's never too early to start thinking about it and to start advocating for pieces that you think might go wrong. It's a lot of give and take between the state and the localities. And I think it's probably fair to say June 3rd or June 4th without knowing for sure.
Okay. What day of the week? Sorry. Do you know off the top of your head what the businesses are? I know it's, I know one is professional services.
They were in the email last night. Let me look.
Yeah, I'll look. Okay. But
No,
people can,
I'm on my computer right now.
if everything goes as planned, you're thinking June 4th is the day.
June 3rd or June 4th. 14 days officially, I believe, is June 2nd. That's up on the dashboard. Yeah, I would say probably June 3rd, June 4th. And the clusters are administrative services, expanded retail, professional services, and real estate, which means essentially showings. People can do showings again.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll take a closer look at that. Thanks.
Yeah, the showings are actually a big deal because you've had people buy houses that haven't sold their houses yet.
Supervisor Hogan.
And they're buying them sight unseen. Sorry.
Thank you. Do we have any clarity on what falls under professional services? And do we have any idea when all that flood of guidance is going to come out for all this next phase?
I wish it came out yesterday. We're pushing for it to come out ASAP. Phase 1 came out, if memory serves, phase 1 got out on Wednesday. Before I was allowed for some, so I'm hoping that comes out today, tomorrow, because you're going to have some localities qualify for phase 1 on Friday or Saturday. I guess that's the advantage of being a couple of days behind them. I don't know yet what the specific breakouts are going to be under those categories, but let's just try to anticipate it, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Sieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps this is more of an issue for Amanda, or a question for Amanda at the direction of the chairman of the board, Frank, but my question becomes, with this resolution passing committee, I understand it still needs to pass the full board, but I'm looking at the comment from the head of the Lake George Chamber and asking about what can the business community do to continue to advocate on these efforts. I know, Mike, you mentioned it going to your task force, but again, our committee structure is here at the county for economic development and higher education, and that's the committee that this has passed through. Is there a way that we can notify agencies like Intercounty, which I believe Kevin Garrity has been organizing for tomorrow online, but perhaps for a future meeting where so many counties come together to talk about these issues, that we could send a copy of the resolution to, along with whether it be the APA, NISAC, our assembly and senator, our congressional representatives, and AATV. I just think that something like this is certainly going to be looked at from other boards and other counties, and it would be incredibly helpful for them to also see it. So I guess I'm looking for a little clarification, and maybe it comes from Frank or Ryan or Amanda, I'm not quite sure how that happens. I recall just recently we put something through committee and it didn't go through the full board, and we sent a letter on, I think it was a couple letters that Frank drafted. So I'm unclear to the procedures, whether it needs to go to the full board or it can just come out of committee now to move that along during this time.
Thank you.
This is Amanda. Normally, the way this works is in the resolution, there would be a final resolve paragraph that would dictate who I'm to send the resolution to. This resolution that I'm looking at doesn't give any advisement who it should be sent to. We would automatically send it to the APA because that's who the resolution is directed towards. But as far as I can see on this resolution, that would be the only distribution we would do.
Can I make an a proposed amendment then to it, if Supervisor Dickinson would be agreeable that no? I'm seeing Craig shake his head no.
No, we've.
Well, how does it work then? So every time we go to send a resolution on from the board, if it doesn't state it in it, we don't send it? Is that how it works?
Supervisor Leggett.
Thank you. We voted on it. If there's to be amendments, let's do it at the board meeting. I think we're pushing the issue a little if we're to send it out before the board meeting. It's not passed by the full board yet.
Okay, well then I just want to make sure we stick to that rule for every resolution that comes before committees, because frequently we have been sending letters out of committee, and maybe that's something we need to look at a board policy on, because it has been happening, Craig. I mean, put this issue aside, I think we need to be consistent.
So we are at 9:57, 9:58. I will take one more comment, Supervisor Bramer, but I'm stickler to trying to make sure that I don't, any following committee have to start late because of me. So if you have a brief comment,
No, I'll refrain. Thank you.
thank you. So any other business to come before the committee today?
Move to adjourn, Mike.
Thank you. Second, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your help and attendance this morning. Have a great day.